The questions are, is fascism bad? Yes or no? Are trans people people? Yes or no? Is sex work work? Yes or no? Land back for Palestine and all oppressed peoples? Yes or no? Is capitalism bad and needs to be changed? Yes or no? So just answer those 5 questions for me, if you feel up to it, and I can basically give you my thoughts and feelings. Just because fascism is a social ailment, it is 100% a social ailment because historically, despite whatever they're saying, uh, it's a bad faith movement. Hi everyone. Today is a video that's kind of off the cuff. It's just me responding to a situation where I feel like I have something to say, a fly on the wall, if you will. And it's specifically me responding to Forever Dirt, the pedantic malice of President Sunday. And this was something that got recommended to me randomly. Nobody showed this to me. The algorithm did, of all things. And I was like, oh, this is a tiny little video from a channel of a similar size to mine, a little bit bigger than mine. And it's about President Sunday. It's someone critiquing them. And I didn't know who this person was. I didn't know what pedantic malice was. But reading the title, I could kind of understand what this person meant because I had been on President Sunday's stream before and had found them to be pedantic to a certain extent in ways that were not always constructive, let's say, and honestly a bit off-putting given the reasons why I was on said stream. So this has led to a little bit of a back and forth in the comments between the author of this video and myself, though not so much about President Sunday, though that does come up, but also some other stuff as well. And for all intents and purposes, this video is just me going over what they said and giving a little bit of extra context to the initial stuff, but mainly me responding to what they said at the end, which was a lot. And they specifically say things in regard to, I don't like to use the label fascist. I think it's problematic. And as an anti-fascist myself and someone who writes books on the subject, I thought that was an odd thing to say. And this video has less to do with President Sunday then, and more to do with Forever Dirt's thoughts on fascism. So I'm going to try and respond to this top to bottom. We'll begin with what we say initially, and then we'll get to their conversation with me, leading to them saying they don't like the term fascism, where I'm just going to be responding to what they say because I haven't had a chance to read it all. But what I did read led me to think, okay, I'm probably going to have a lot to say because I feel like I'm the ideal audience. I'm the ideal recipient of this comment. Maybe it's bait, it's just conversation, whatever. So, yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So, this video, The Pedantic Malice of President Sunday. Here I review President Sunday's reaction to Gutsick Gibbons' video about evolution, where he criticizes Gutsick Gibbons' understanding of the history of ideas and by extension criticizes the whole field of primatology, claiming they make bad political scientists. Okay. It's a little bit ironic, I think, given that Forever Dirt thinks that the word fascism is problematic and that it perhaps shouldn't be used the way that it is. I don't want to put words in their mouth, of course, but I'm noting a touch of irony there. But I'll see what they say explicitly, but just keep that in mind. So I say initially, the pedantic malice sounds like an undiscovered Lovecraft manuscript, not gonna lie. As for Sunday, I remember being on his stream once For context, and please bear with me, he wanted me to explain why my research on Bad Empanada was misused by someone else to smear yet another person, respectively Trash Discourse and the Cavernacle, the former who threw me under the bus, and the latter who eventually ran defense for Bad Empanada, but that's another story. To that, I remember being okay with Sunday because he disliked Bad Empanada, whose fashion red paint. So when he asked me for info, I went on his stream to say my part. Hi, I'm just a transgothicist and academic whose dossier on Bad Empanada got misused by a bad actor who said they were writing an essay on Nazi furries, which applied to my work on furries, which Trash wanted to apply to Bad Empanada. That was the idea anyways. However, when I asked Sunday for his questions up front, he told me it wasn't an interrogation and didn't want to give me his questions that he was going to ask, saying this is just casual, friendly. Except when we actually talked, it felt like he'd prepared some very specific queries ahead of time. Maybe, maybe not. I just remember wanting to give my view of things uninterrupted. I found myself kind of in a debate with the guy. Wasn't a fan of that, though his politics mostly seemed okay-ish. And then I say, what's wrong with non-compete? A non-binary anti-fascist. You lost me at the end there. Before we look into the follow-up to what I said initially, I want to share what I wrote about Bad Empanada, or specifically how I was involved with Bad Empanada, Trash Discourse, that led me to talk to President Sunday in the first place. So specifically, I had a dossier. It started just being about Bad Empanada, but it turned into a critique of Marxist-Leninism versus anarcho-communism, with Bad Empanada being ostensibly Marxist-Leninist with fascist behaviors, and me being an anarcho-communist, specifically a trans anarcho-communist who believes in intersectionality in ways that I think Bad Empanada, acting fascist in red paint, is generally not conducive to or harmful towards. He's predatory. So, to give a single example of that, here's Bad Empanada calling my friends and I useless eaters. You might as well call my friends and I useless eaters at this point in regards to something that he said, at which point he agreed, and then proceeds to accuse me of being a sex pest and calls for forced labor against me for critiquing him for being ableist, despite the fact that I agree with his statements on Natalie Wynn being a liberal Zionist. So that's just a taste of my piece on Bad Empanada and criticism of Marxist-Leninism more broadly, though again, for context, President Sunday wanted to have me on because of a different situation where Trash Discourse approached me, a video essayist, asking about Bad Empanada and saying, hey, I saw your stuff on Bad Empanada and it reminds me of Nazi furries in the 2010s being bad actors and basically trying to, like the fox in the hen house, get their way inside different communities to break them up and prey on them. And I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So for context, this is Trash Discourse. They still have a YouTube channel, though they've taken down all of their content because they made a video citing my work and using it to smear the Cavernacle vis-a-vis Bad Empanada, Ari, this guy. And what ended up happening is they basically took my work and used it in bad faith to apply it to someone it didn't apply to, and then cite me at the very end of the video. They basically just tacked me on there and threw me under the bus while saying a bunch of really stupid stuff vis-a-vis the Cavernacle, which was, hey, the Cavernacle has a colonizer accent. They look like a colonizer and they're a Nazi and they do all this Nazi stuff. Now, the irony with all of that is the Tabernacle at the time wasn't really saying a lot about Bad Empanada, but they also weren't really involved with them at all, and they were just kind of focusing on other stuff. And I asked at the time, hey, can you say something about all of this? And there's a whole bunch of context here if you want to know more about it, but essentially, Essay 9.25, apologizing for misapplied research, asking for the Tabernacle's help with Bad Empanada. I essentially asked Cav months ago, hey, this person used my research in bad faith. I'm sorry they used it against you. It was supposed to be against Bad Empanada. Could you perhaps do something about it? And then months later, the Tabernacle is called out by another much bigger YouTuber for not saying anything about Bad Empanada, specifically FD Signifier, and the Tabernacle takes umbrage with that. And in their comment section, I'm like, actually, I know that you've seen my dossier on Bad Empanada and you've chosen to keep quiet about it. And the Tabernacle went on to accuse me of writing the essay with trash, which I didn't. And then I had to go on and explain that and give receipts. And all of that information is specifically in this essay in particular, White Straight Guys with Beards, or Western Marxism and Its Flaws, Transphobia in the Anti-Zionist Movement. So that's a lot of context regarding a situation between President Sunday and myself when the trash Discord stuff was going on initially. President Sunday, who wasn't a fan of Bad Empanada, wanted the scoop. And they're like, what's going on? It seems like trash really flew off the handle, and you are the researcher they cited. Could you perhaps give your perspective? So this comment initially that I post in Forever Dirt's comment section was essentially about all of that. And what happened was President Sunday had me on. I gave my piece, but also found myself on the receiving end of something that felt a bit more like an interrogation than I was comfortable with. After I had been told that it would be a casual conversation, I was dealing with someone who had rehearsed things in such a way for their audience on their stream, and I didn't really feel comfortable with that. I thought, okay, this is just going to be a conversation between me and President Sunday one-on-one, when it was actually me, President Sunday. He had rehearsed his statements, had a camera pointed at me while his audience was behind him, and he said, pay no attention to chat. And I didn't really appreciate that, and it made me feel weird because, again, I was a victim in this situation and was being used in ways where President Sunday was trying to get me to say certain things, lead me down certain points of discussion towards certain conclusions, and it felt kind of strange to me. Despite the fact that we both didn't like Bad Empanada, it didn't stop President Sunday from being a bit, well, strange. A little bad faith, honestly, in his own right, which, when I saw the pedantic malice of President Sunday by Forever Dirt, I thought to myself, okay, that's what I thought of, was how President Sunday had treated me in regards to trash discourse, Bad Empanada, the Tabernacle, and myself. So that's kind of all of the context that you need for the rest of this video, because we're now going to go over the entirety of our conversation, as short as it is. So towards the end of Forever Dirt's video, they say they don't like bread tubers, but specifically non-compete. They actually say they don't like bread tubers earlier in the video, at which point I thought that sounded a bit strange because, breadtube usually I think is more of a liberal sort of thing, and non-compete is a dyed-in-the-wool Marxist-Leninist. Like, they actually stand by their principles, and while they're not the most spicy person on the face of the earth, they are at the very least principled and consistent in their predictions, how they make them, and being relatively on the money in regards to fascism in the United States. So it sounded a bit strange to me when I was kind of nodding along with Forever Dirt, and I found most of what they said in regards to President Sunday, where they make various points about Sunday vis-a-vis Gutsick Gibbon, where President Sunday takes umbrage with Gutsick Gibbon, and they could make valid critiques about this specific individual or even primatology more broadly if they wanted to, but they're doing it in a way that felt kind of bad faith, felt kind of debate bro. And I basically agreed with that because I had been on the receiving end of that myself, as I said. But then at the end of the video, they say, oh, well, bread tubers, like, they mention Philosophy Tube, which I agree with. I don't like Philosophy Tube. They're a liberal Zionist, just like Natalie Wynn, aka ContraPoints, who they emulate part and parcel. But then Forever Dirt says non-compete. And I'm like, non-compete, the Marxist-Leninist, who, while they're not the spiciest individual on the face of the earth, isn't really what I would call a bread tuber. And they give away their books for free. They preach Marxism more so than Marxist-Leninism, I would argue. I mean, Marxist-Leninism is practiced by Stalin, let's say, but Marxist-Leninism, as it came to be known after Stalin, sure. And keeping all of that in mind, they seem relatively okay. They're a non-binary person living in Vietnam, and they're critical of the United States and fascism in ways that I generally agree with, even if I have a bone to pick with Marxist-Leninism more broadly. Non-compete, for all intents and purposes, is someone that I don't really hold a grudge against them. I cite their work, and they haven't really done anything to lead me to basically discount what they say or otherwise treat them as a bad actor. And even bad actors can be broken clocks. Bad Empanada is a broken clock, for instance. The Cavernacle is a broken clock. So if those people can be right, then non-compete certainly can too. And I wouldn't want to discount someone just because, well, they're banal. So is Marx. Marx is incredibly banal and boring. And yet there's plenty of useful predictive things within his models that we can take. E.g., capital is dead labor that sucks like the vampire on living labor from Capital. Super productive, useful statement. As a Gothicist, I find that tremendously productive, and I use it all the time in my own work. Specifically, I have an essay currently, Gothic Intersectionality and Applying it to Other Workers, or an antidote to Prometheus, Fascism, and its Cannibalism under Capital, Magic Potions and Seeds, which is part of a larger body of work that I have, but one that here I cite John the Duncan and Aspinall's The Hidden Roots of Neoliberal Fascism, and Jesse Gender's The Graham Plattner Accusations Have Leftist Men Telling on Themselves, where I'm responding to them, but also giving a follow-up to my essay, White Straight Guys with Beards, the one where I am critiquing the Cavernacle and other people within Marxist-Leninism more broadly. Keeping all of that in mind, this is part of a larger body of work that I do within my book series and my partner's book series, Bay Ryan from New Zealand, Sex Positivity versus Sex Coercion or Gothic Communism, Liberating Sex Work Under Capitalism Through Iconoclastic Art, written and illustrated by me, edited and co-written by Bay Ryan, and it covers a wide variety of topics, including state vampirism, which comes from Marx and critiques a wide variety of things, including being anti-Zionist in my work, critiquing Zionism, fascism more broadly, and I incorporate a lot of different things. So just because Marx is banal, just because he's homophobic, doesn't mean that we can't take his work and use it anyways. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, or in this case, the old guy with a beard who's right about certain things. Keeping all of that in mind, when Forever Dirt and I have our little back and forth, they have some things that they say about Marxism and fascism and studying it. And you have to keep in mind, as I respond to Forever Dirt, I am trans, I am an anti-Zionist, I'm an anti-fascist, I'm an anti-capitalist, I'm an anti-racist. I am essentially against the status quo as it exists under capitalism, and therefore for the abolishment of the state, for the abolishment of capital, for the abolishment of a system that preys on nature, vis-a-vis Patel and Moore's arguments against Cartesian dualism, nature versus society, from their book, The History of the World in Seven Cheap Things, under, a critique of Cartesian dualism, like I'm for the abolishment of the state, so I'm a very specific audience. And I'm now going to respond to the rest of the conversation that we had. What's wrong with non-commit, a non-binary anti-fascist? You lost me at the end there. Non-commit is banal to me. A little dry, sure, but that's Marxism for you. Maybe they need their bad ambi phase, spice things up. In all seriousness, non-compete is a bit more principled than your average bread tuber, A.J. Contrapoints, who's a liberal Zionist despite her stylish presentation and sense of humor. If as a trans woman in times of fascism, I'll take the slightly bland anti-fascist who isn't a dick but seems genuine over the charming sellout any day of the week, and I've devoted entire book chapters to how and why classic Marxism needs more spice. Etanche is a good balance, I think. Forever Dirt says, I don't like finger pointing at other people for being liberal or Zionist, and I don't like characterizing things as fascist. So that's a bit of a red flag. They go on to say, I think all of those things are characteristic of problems I have with the left in general. For instance, most of these leftists have significant overlap with liberalism. True. And from one point of view or another can be understood as liberal in their own way. Also true. But the insistence on needing to otherize the liberal just turns liberal into an insult rather than a broad point of view, which forms the basis of many concrete political philosophies. You're not wrong insofar as if it just turns into Dios mío, a liberal, then that's a problem. But something can be an insult, like fuck you, liberal, and still be a valid criticism at the same time. Like I could say fuck you, Nazi, and not to you, but just in general. And that would still be a valid critique of someone. The idea of having completely polite, neat, non-messy discourse, I think, is unto itself a bit of a fool's errand, because the reality of political discourse isn't some erudite, polite drawing room discourse. We're all just sitting around in armchairs debating these things politely. You're going to run into bad actors all the time. R.E. the Cavernacle, Bad Empanada, Trash Discourse. All of those people are bad actors. And Trash, in particular, was queer in ways where up until the moment they threw me under the bus, they seemed relatively okay. And then they made that video, and then, oh shit, I've been duped by a queer person. It can happen. Betrayal is betrayal, et tu, Brute. So keeping all of that in mind, I do agree that if you're just using the word as an insult and you don't understand the underlying ramifications of that and the political underpinnings, that through a dialectical material critique, you can't say anything other than fuck you, liberal, and you don't understand why you're saying fuck you, liberal, that's a problem. Before the term liberalism was codified during the 1800s, to be liberal was an attitude or a disposition which formed the basis of all left-wing thought, so to dissociate from the label completely, I think, is a mistake. Right, but liberalism is dead dogma. And under neoliberalism, which is a re-freeing of the market after Bretton Woods economics, in the 80s under Thatcher and Reagan, and after that, third wayism, and what we have currently, neoliberalism decaying into fascism, are John the Duncan and company, who I respond to here in this essay, The Hidden Roots of Neoliberal Fascism. Like, dead dogma is a valid concern because liberalism may have meant something in the 1800s, but now it's a sock puppet that's used by the bourgeoisie under neoliberalism to espouse something that is bad faith. America is a settler colonial police state that genocided and continues to genocide the indigenous population of Turtle Island. So understanding that liberal is a sock puppet, and to use that in ways where I can be like, liberals suck, and I understand the context behind that, and can recognize that, yeah, I realize that Thomas Paine in Common Sense and similar critiques of the status quo before him called out the aristocracy and older forms of government as the principal ruffians, but at the same time can recognize that liberalism has become a zombie of itself, dead dogma that preys on the planet in bad faith under neoliberalism. And I don't think it's a mistake to use labels like fascist in ways that are antagonistic insofar as to critique someone is to critique our class enemies in this case. If you're not with dismantling capital, degrowth, intersectionality for those aims, then you are a traitor. You are a class traitor, you're a race traitor, you're a token queer person, a traitor of queerness more broadly in a revolutionary way, which essentially describes liberal, Zionist, and fascist. And this is coming from me as a fervent anti-capitalist, anti-Zionist, anti-fascist, and anti-liberal, I suppose, illiberal, I suppose they'd say. But at the end of the day, you do have to take certain hard stances. And that does involve having an antagonistic approach within the so-called free marketplace of ideas. I don't owe my enemies politeness or something that seems neat, coherent, and easy to understand, when in reality, terms like fascist, for instance, are classically as difficult as nailing jelly to the wall. This isn't just coming from me, but also John the Duncan in their video where they describe their article, Hidden Roots. They discuss an older definition of fascism or nailing jelly to the wall, and I boil it down essentially to cannibalism. Fascism is when the state cannibalizes itself, when, as Non-Compete says in their own work, when imperialism comes home to empire, which is a perfectly easy to understand definition. And to say that fascism isn't readily understood, I think is disingenuous unto itself, or at the very least ill-informed. Just because their term is widely misunderstood doesn't mean it isn't widely studied. And if people aren't able to understand that in and out of academia, that's honestly their problem. And it's perfectly valid, as you do, to recognize that many people belong to the state in some shape or form. Many are progressive, and just the term left or right speaks to left or right of the French crown during the French, leading up to the French Revolution. So the terms left and right are problematic unto themselves, just as Marxist-Leninism is problematic, warts and all. Marx was homophobic, arguably anti-Semitic too. And there's, people are people and they're going to have flaws. And just because words like liberal, Zionist, fascism are fuzzy and they're used by people in bad faith and they're used by people antagonistically, as I do, against my class enemies, doesn't mean that we shouldn't use the language like that. It's the same kind of argument as don't call someone a Nazi if they don't belong to the Nazi party, when the whole point of calling someone a Nazi is to call out fascism. So that's just the reality of dealing with bad actors and being, to some degree, hostile ourselves. Because when you're dealing with someone who's trying to kill you, sometimes you can't be polite. Sometimes you have to deceive them. Sometimes you have to recognize that they're a lost cause, and then handle them accordingly. I'm sorry, that's just how it goes. And to say otherwise is to tone police. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing necessarily, but also don't abandon the antagonistic usage of language that's fuzzy by its usage, ipso facto. As for Zionists, I think there is room for having a nuanced interpretation of the ethics of the Israel-Palestine conflict. You mean genocide? Again, Michael Brooks, it's incredibly simple. One side has lots of power, and they're using it to abuse another. That includes the United States taking up the British mantle to conduct American Christian Zionism, Christo-fascism in the region through a vassal state, which is demonstrably fascist. It's not a conflict per se, it's not a war, it's a genocide. But again, Zionist, when used as a term of abuse, makes it harder to discuss these issues. How? They're Jewish Nazis, specifically secular Jews or muscular Jews that adopt a vengeful position of strength, a neoconservative position of strength that can be articulated through theory. And just because it's not a term of abuse to criticize someone. Oh, are you going to coddle the poor baby Zionists? Fuck those motherfuckers. What do you think of that? Like, no, they are rapists. They are genocidal murderers. It is not abuse to call them something that is broad and fuzzy. But at the end of the day, despite its fuzziness and people saying, oh, well, this is fuzzy and it's so difficult. No, it's actually quite simple. Zionism is fascism through a veneer of Judaism. That's it. It's quite simple. Okay. And that kind of thing is very easy to do. And it doesn't obfuscate what I'm trying to say. If you're uncomfortable with me taking umbrage with that, that's on you. That's a you problem. But also, I don't feel especially comfortable with you calling it a conflict. Call it a genocide. A genocide is very demonstrable at this point. And I would ask you, if you reply to this video, does Israel have the right to defend itself? As you might argue, I would say, actually, Palestine should exist, and a two-state solution is just to appease the rapist in this situation and give into another settler colonial project. Do you think that Palestine should be given its land back? Are you for land back in this scenario or not? From one point of view, who are you, Obi-Wan Kenobi? The belief that the country of Israel should be allowed to exist at all can be considered Zionist. And that's how Benjamin Netanyahu justifies his belief that there is no distinction between anti-Semite and anti-Zionist, because to be anti-Zionist would be to support genocide of the Israeli people. Darvo, essentially. Deny, abuser, reverse, victim, offender. So there is a lot of nuance that gets lost in terms such as these that are weaponized by the left. Well, no, fuck Benjamin Netanyahu and fuck their settler colonial project. You don't have to afford them nuance. They're genocidal murderers that are funded by the United States, itself an enactor of genocide, to conduct genocide elsewhere in furtherance to profit. A demolition phase conducting their own Holocaust to do essentially their version of Lebensraum, and taking the land from the people that existed there by saying that they don't actually own the land. The foreign invader does. No different than Manifest Destiny. No different than Christopher Columbus. It's not complex. There's not nuance. It's like you're running interference and defense for Benjamin Netanyahu. You're playing devil's advocate for a very bad man. As Imperator Furioso said to Max in Fury Road, you're relying on the gratitude of a very bad man. And you essentially playing devil's advocate for Benjamin Netanyahu is unto itself kind of a red flag, kind of not really surprising. But let's continue. And then there's the point of fascism, which I have expressed a lot of thoughts on this channel because it is my primary area of interest. I understand why people like to use the term loosely. Well, no, it's like the term is used to recognize danger tied to things that exist in a fluid state, but to use something in a fluid state in recognition to a threat is still tied to a specific thing, which is parenti, a false revolution. As non-compete puts it, fascism in this historical view functions as a capitalist antibody against working class movements. It is a false revolution, according to Parenti, designed to fool workers into fighting against their own class interests. Source: Third Wayism and the Liberal Fascist Bargain. So that's pretty specific language, and you can point the finger at someone and recognize that fascism takes many different forms. No two versions of fascism are the same, but the same underlying false revolution is constant historically, according to history, as predicated on material conditions that, through the ruling class, serve the state and its predation. So if you're fighting jelly, you gotta kind of be jelly yourself sometimes. And there is a specific approach or attack when being fluid ourselves, but there's still a fluidity to that specificity. Those aren't mutually exclusive things. As Bruce Lee said, water can flow or it can crash. Being waterfront. So, like, again, these aren't mutually exclusive. And that it is a common convention these days, but I personally dislike using the term to refer to anything that doesn't properly resemble the core, self-affirming ideas of fascist doctrine related to the supremacy of the state and nationalist collectivism. Well, again, though, like, if you're just pointing the finger at someone and saying, fuck you, fascist, here's the paradox. Someone might not understand what the reasoning behind that, and they could still be right. If someone said to Benjamin Netanyahu, fuck you, fascist, fuck you, Zionist, they're not wrong, even if they don't understand the theory. Now, ideally, you want to have a good understanding of theory so you can predict things and you can replace it with something better, as opposed to just another version of the principal ruffian. But at the end of the day, like, I agree with you insofar as, yeah, you want to focus on what I would call state predation. You want to counteract that the way that fascism functions, which is cannibalism of the state, liberalism, communism, socialism, et al., to revive the state to return to normal, so to speak. And so, like, I kind of see what you're saying in terms of, like, an accurate, conscious understanding of theory is fine, but even if people don't have a complete, perfect understanding, they're still technically not wrong. Benjamin Netanyahu et al., including the United States and the ruling class, and a wide variety of breadtubers, support them and support state predation. And that's something that we can challenge specifically in ways that can be accurate and fluid at the same time. You conclude by saying, I think fascism as a philosophy rather than a social ailment. No, it's definitely a social ailment. So my perspective on it and the use of the term is different from the left. So now I'm going to ask you some questions. And if you respond to my video, I just want you to answer them, okay? And I'm going to put this at the start of the video, but essentially, the questions, that is. The questions are, is fascism bad? Yes or no? Are trans people people? Yes or no? Is sex work? Yes or no? Land back for Palestine and all oppressed peoples? Yes or no? Is capitalism bad and needs to be changed? Yes or no? So just answer those 5 questions for me, if you feel up to it, and I can basically give you my thoughts and feelings, just because I fascism is a social ailment. It is 100% a social ailment because historically, despite whatever they're saying, it's a bad faith movement. It's something that plays out historically in ways that, regardless if there are legitimate grievances tied to state predation, the middle class generally in Nazi Germany, for instance, weaponizes to white, straight middle class men specifically to prey on others and seize power for themselves. Speaking of not having like an accurate understanding of theory, fascism historically in practice is guilty of the things that you're pointing the finger at. Non-compete of all people being banal, I guess, the left more broadly. Non-compete doesn't even live in America, and they're a Marxist-Leninist who puts their money where their mouth is, and they give their books away for free. Like, so what are your criticisms of them as far as all of this goes? What are your criticisms of Bad Empanada? What are your criticisms of the state of Israel? And if you don't think fascism is a social ailment, what do you think it is? And I'm just going to cut the video off here just because as an anti-fascist, this is me extending the olive branch in good faith, just because I'm noticing some red flags here. You're saying things that are a little sus to me. Like, fascism is when a society gets sick and cannibalizes itself historically. You can have some definition on paper, some idealized form of what it's supposed to be, fascism being like a fraternity or a alliance, but it's used ahistorically to begin with under Benito Mussolini in bad faith, a guy who classically stood for nothing and abused socialist language to turn at the drop of a hat in ways that were then taken by Hitler, who was also responding to America and its own fascism. Like, fascism is something that springs up around the world, and there isn't some neat, coherent thing beyond what I would describe as cannibalism through the state, not just in crisis, but in decay. That's a nice, simple definition. So when I say fascist, that's what I mean. And what do you mean? I want to know. So yeah, if you want to respond, go right ahead. I await your response. Because again, you're not just fucking with anyone here. You're fucking with, sorry, I wanted to say wet ass pussy, but you're fucking with a trans author who's written multiple books on this subject. And I'm inviting you to have a good faith conversation. Now's your chance. You know, show me that you're not a fascist weirdo by responding to these questions. And I am curious to hear what you say.